Okay, hi. I'm Alexandra Damsker, and I am a securities lawyer. I started at the SEC. I worked at a big international firm. I headed a practice, and then I had my own practice. I founded a biotech and an affiliated consumer product company, and exited the biotech. And I'm now working as a strategist and an attorney with new technology companies. I'm particularly interested in blockchain, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and robotics. I actually see a lot of connections between these fields in the future. So I work with companies in these spaces doing traditional legal stuff, but primarily my value add is helping to figure out how to get the company to market, how to create product market fit, how to really use the technology in a way that's unique and is profitable. I think revenue models are probably the most important thing and probably the most forgotten in the tech industry. And then also do some growth hacking, because this is actually a really big area that requires more like marketplace growth than traditional company growth. So it's fascinating. These areas are amazing. They're growing so fast. The amount of technology is incredible. And the people who are working in them are some of the smartest people I've ever met. And they have amazing vision of what can happen in the future and how to get there. The one most important thing I think is I'm also trying to bring in the practicality of not just should it be built, not just can it be built, but should it be built. So I think should it be built, or just the possibility of having it built, is not a sufficient reason to create something. So the biotech had an interesting path, because I don't have any industry. I didn't have any connections in the industry. I wasn't in academia or in the industry. And so in order for me to gain any interest from any industry leaders, I needed to show that I had consumer pull. This is, again, this idea that your revenue model is the most important thing, not just building users. You can get people to like your company all the time, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll pay for it. Or if you do premium models, you can pay for it later. So my most important thing was finding customers that could show that they would pay for what I had to offer and would continue to pay. So I had recidivist customers. And to show that my product could be manufactured cheaply, easily, and consistently. So I built a consumer products company, and then when it showed very large traction, I had like the Producers Guild that was a client, 40 stores in LA that were like premium stores that were interested in my company, in getting the products, or I could take the biotech product and develop that separately, which I did. I went to the accelerator. I hustled really hard, and I had offers for the company by the end. And the most important thing there was a lot of the interest, and my end offer came from a big competitor. So it was essentially either sell to them, or they had all the infrastructure and distribution, and they really could have swamped me. So it seemed like a good time to be done. So that I did that, and then the next thing I found was blockchain. I've been very interested in financial technology for a long time. And blockchain looks like a great way for me to build a marketplace that I have wanted to build for a long time, because there's a group of people in the securities field who take advantage of a loophole and are unregulated, basically unregulated market makers. They have advantage of asymmetric information, so they make money with no risk. To me, this is unfair. When I was at the SEC, I tried very hard to regulate them out of existence. That did not work. So I thought, okay, now I'm ready to start a new company, and I thought blockchain technology is essentially like the next point on the internet scale. It's basically true disintermediation. So So I thought, okay, I'm gonna build this. I got a team together, we started developing, and then I realized that the technology just isn't there for what I need to do. It has to be very fast, has to be extremely secure, and it has to take a load similar to or more than what is considered now peak load, which is 24,000 transactions a second, which is the Visa rate, right? So that's what Visa processes. And blockchain is nowhere near that right now. So, even if I had half that rate, we're still not near that. So the technology is better now, but the problem right now, I find, is that all the gains in speed are being made at the expense of security, which I think is not a great way to go. So there are a lot of options that are available right now, but it's still not a great time to start this particular technology. There are people who are trying to do something relatively similar, but they are running into the same problem that I did. But in the process of doing this, I ended up learning so much about blockchain, about the technology, about the regulations, and of course, this was before 2017. So, we didn't have the crypto winter or anything yet. But what I wasn't in it for the cryptocurrency. What I was in it for was this amazing technology that really allowed us to get rid of these, the people who are basically controlling way stations in the internet. So we have what is right now, people mistake distributed and decentralized. We have a decentralized internet. So we have not one nexus where most of the information flows. We have many of these nexuses where information passes through, it's generated from. They form at way stations for information to pass through, but it's not truly distributed, which is directly peer-to-peer. We don't have that in the internet, and that is what distributed ledger technology, DLT, or blockchain does. So there's a lot of very interesting stuff happening. I find cryptocurrency to be one of the smaller things that's happening in this industry. But again, in the process of learning all of this, people asked me to help them with their companies. And then I was asked to speak at a bunch of events, and then I was asked to write, and now I'm doing a book. I was asked by a publisher to write a book on best practices and regulations in the blockchain space, which I've just signed that agreement, actually. I signed that contract, and so I'm starting that. And anybody out there who's in the blockchain space, you may be hearing from me, asking you what your best practices are and what issues you've had. It is basically at a filled out outline at this point. So, but there's so much happening in that. And then I also work in other new technologies as I find companies that are really innovating in this space. And I'm just very fortunate that I get to meet some really amazing people that are doing some just incredible stuff. And anyway, that's a very long way of saying I work with blockchain. That's what I do. I remember the internet boom and bust. And to me, there are a lot of hallmarks that are very similar. And the big thing about the internet, the beginnings of the internet, of using the internet as a revenue stream, is that people didn't actually know what business model would work. So they tried a lot of the same things. They tried different things. And if you look at it, it took 20 years for Amazon to reach profit status. I mean, it was a long, long time. Even after that model was proven, they were building huge revenue. Their particular model prevented them from reaching profit sooner because they worked so hard to undercut other people's prices that they were fortunate to be able to exist at a loss for that long. And that's really just because so many of the shares were held internally. So this just brings me to one side point, which is be very careful when you're talking about selling equity, because remember, those people have a say in your company for a long, long time. And if you don't want to hear what they have to say, or you don't think what they're going to have to say is useful, then reconsider taking their money, because the one very smart thing and lucky thing that Jeff Bezos had going for him was that he had his parents financing him and internal financing, so he didn't have to worry about listening to someone dealing with the bottom line before he was ready. So it's again the Walton family had the same issue, with Walgreens. They had the same benefit of a lot of internal financing, so they were able to stave off Stony Brook Farms, same thing. There's a lot of companies that have taken over market share, but the way that they did that was a lot of financing that was not related to shareholder say. So,
Yeah.
so just keep that.
That is true.
Yeah. There are different, so in each of these different areas, there are different projections of what I think is going to happen in the future. So in blockchain, the first thing that needs to be resolved that people are finally working on it is interoperability. So once we have more interoperability between platforms, people won't be so pressured to build applications on platforms that they think are durable as opposed to those that they think are best suited for their application. So because now the applications are so different that and they're so dependent on the platform that if the platform fails, all of the applications fail, and we're getting a lot of duplication based on different platforms. So it would be nice if we have platforms that are particularly best suited to different things, and interoperability will allow transfer of tokens between these different platforms, which I think is happening. I think it's very nascent, but that's coming. And within 5 years, I think we'll have at least some degree of interoperability. I think that most of the blockchain is not going to be public for a lot of reasons. One is it's too damn heavy. Trying to conduct a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the blockchain most people are aware of, is incredibly time consuming. It takes close to a day at this point. And it's just because of the weight of all the previous transactions, which means as transactions progress, it's just going to get worse. People are trying to use things like sharding and other different technologies to make this go a little faster. They're using DAGs, decentralized acyclic graphs, to try and make it faster too. All of these have their own problems, which we don't really have time for. But I think what's going to end up happening is we're going to have public permission systems and private permission systems. And what's going to end up happening is you're going to have some entity running these permission systems, like only a few people are an internal group, or if you're a member, you get access, and then they'll sell subscriptions to other companies that are complementary in interest. So say a hotel will manage a blockchain for its users, its loyalty program or whatever, and then it will invite an airline and a car service and local boutiques and things like that to take part in getting the information that's on that system. So it'll become a revenue stream for that main provider of the blockchain. They'll be able to sell access to other companies. So your data, based on your purchases or whatever data they're collecting, will become available to people that are not necessarily the people you originally contracted with. The only benefit of this will be over time, as methods for making things more anonymous, decoupling things because of things like GDPR, the privacy laws. As things get decoupled, it'll be actually a big use of data science to take all of the data and be able to interpret it for various markers in the aggregate. And I think that people will be fine with. If you have purchasing data and you're paired with 10 million other people, and someone wants to analyze all of the purchase data in the aggregate, but not necessarily individually, I think it's a very powerful tool for those companies that are getting aggregate information and how they may change at different points over time. And I think individuals still have their privacy protected. So this, to me, is basically one of the future methods. I think that there will be revenue, there will be data collection, and there will be still some measure of privacy. I think there's going to be tracking mechanisms that already exist and will continue to exist and will be expanded to be able to destroy anonymity in blockchain, which personally I think is fine. Anonymity is not the most important part of blockchain. I think the benefit of a lot of the cryptocurrency, I find that in two main areas. One is the unbanked. So there's something like 100 million people or more that have zero access to banks, and they live a much more expensive life. And as cryptocurrency, as opposed to simply tokens, as cryptocurrency or alternative forms of currency gain more distribution, and I think that Starbucks agreement is going to help a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on that I think is going to help bring at least one or two forms of cryptocurrency into mass use. It will help because it will help overseas transactions because you won't have conversion issues or conversion risk. And then the unbanked will be able to, or those in hyperinflationary economies will be able to use cryptocurrency without worrying that they will lose value instantly. However, this cryptocurrency is going to have to be partnered with some form of stable coin, or it'll have to be usually tagged to something that's a bit more stable, because right now the big problem with cryptocurrency is extreme volatility. One of the main benefits, I think, in joining different technologies, I think quantum computing is going to add a huge layer of protection and encryption on blockchain, and also the government is going to love using the technology that currently exists in quantum computing that's being developed and is expanding, which is decrypting. So basically using Shor's algorithm and using it as a very powerful tool to both encrypt and decrypt. And I think using this encryption, the one thing that I'm hoping is the public key nonsense and private key nonsense is right now the big issue in blockchain is nobody is carrying liability for what happens if you lose your keys, or if someone steals your wallet or steals the tokens in your wallet or whatever. You just suffer a loss, and it's enough people, they'll fork it so that you'll gain some measure of recovery. It's a huge problem. And the big problem right now is wallets don't want to be responsible, and the issuers don't want to be responsible, the exchanges don't want to be responsible. Somebody's going to be responsible. And the legal system right now is a very patchwork system, and it's going to have to get a lot more unified. So there will probably be a body that will adjudicate issues based on blockchain in a streamlined jurisdiction. So essentially, a bunch of countries are going to have to come together and say, we essentially appoint, it's like the blockchain version of the American Arbitration Association, to adjudicate any issues that are related, that are not necessarily technological in nature, but are basically either bad faith or theft or whatever. And then hopefully the use of things like quantum computing will help add a measure of security, because hacking, which everybody says, it's like hackless or whatever, that's not true. Obviously, everybody knows that there are many hacks that have happened. That will really help secure some of the leaks. And then, AI, I think, is also going to come into this in the future. I think there's going to be, I don't really see AI as like this, Skynet thing that everybody's so worried about. I'm not.
No, it's not.
Everybody knows that too. It's from the 70s. Still hasn't happened. I mean, 2001 hasn't happened. Like, sci-fi is very useful in a lot of ways in looking at what the future could be. But I think that it tends to be more nefarious, because that makes for a better drama, right? It makes for a better story. But I do think that that artificial intelligence and machine learning, and especially like deep learning, are all going to be very useful, because we're going to end up with an enormous amount of data and no idea what to do with it. So using these in terms of just interpreting what's going on and being able to predict future actions, I think will help. One of the things that I'd love to see is some pairing of AI and blockchain, so that there's some sort of stop loss. Right now, the big problem is the use of bots, and people who are conducting a lot of arbitrage on these exchanges are trying to get best price, or looking for like small fluctuations and trying to make a bunch of slight moves and turning that into a profit. And that has nothing to do with internal value. So there are rules in the stock exchange that prohibit this kind of short swing trading. And right now, there really isn't anything comparable on the exchanges. The exchanges need to adopt a lot of the rules. They need to be full exchanges and not just ATSs or ECMs. They have to be full exchanges with full compliance systems. And then what they need to do are stabilize the prices by preventing this sort of day trading arbitrage. And I think that using some sort of predictive algorithm to say, like a bunch of people are conducting the same transaction because all the bots are operating on the same amount of information, I think would do something to say at least freeze trading at a particular time to let the information clear out and then resume trading after that. So that's another very long answer of, where are things going in the future. I think they're headed in some really interesting directions, but I think that the most important thing is making sure that regulation keeps up with the technology, which it has consistently had a problem doing because the private sector does not talk to the public sector. It's probably the biggest issue in almost any industry. It's for the and I think that if there's no reason to, I was in the public sector, and there's no reason to be afraid of talking to people. It doesn't put you on some screen, or they don't pass around the information. I wish people were more amenable to bringing future concerns as opposed to, past troubles, but bringing future issues or present ideas to the private sector. And the private sector, for that matter, has to be more amenable to having open discussions and more easily accessible methods of information gathering. Because right now you have to rely on people like me who know people or have other channels. And I don't think that that's right. You should be able to access these people freely and not worry about punishment simply because you're trying to do something. Even the process they have right now of no action letters, which is what they suggest everybody try. If you're concerned or you have an issue, you should apply for no action relief. The problem is that's a very expensive and long process. And at the end of the day, you really shouldn't be doing anything during that entire process. So you're basically building in a quiet period. And at the end of the day, they're just as likely to say no as yes. If you knew ahead of time that they would say, no, it's not an issue that you'll have enforcement action on, you would probably just do it anyway. But since you usually have no idea, you don't know if they're going to come out for or against it. So you're basically freezing your current operations and you're adding a ton of expense, and you don't really have any guidance on how to do it correctly. So I think that's a misguided process that I think should be amended as a source of information generally. So I have to say, honestly, I think my life is better. It's better in every way having kids. It is better in every way. I am better at time management than I was when I was single and when I didn't have kids. I am much better at organizing my day, figuring out what priorities I have, and getting things done as efficiently as possible. When I tell people I am the most efficient person who will ever hire, it's because I am the most efficient person. Because, I have to be here for my kids too. So I get stuff done. When I'm working, I am working. And when I am off, I try to be off. And, I'm fortunate that I have help. We have someone who watches the baby. I'm very fortunate that I have flexibility where I can work from home when I need to. I'm looking at starting a partnership with a major law firm so that we can offer consulting and advice in conjunction with legal advice, because I think legal advice is something you get from a lot of different places. It may or may not be correct, but you can get it. People feel like they can get that kind of advice everywhere, but I don't know if they can get the kind of advice of like, here's how you grow your business from people who actually have grown businesses. So I think that, these things are very exciting and energizing to me, and they give me a lot of enthusiasm for what I do. I think the most important thing is to love what you do. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Because you're doing it a lot. And because, for me, I'm teaching my kids all the time how to be productive in the world, and also how to bring enthusiasm to your job, even when you have sucky days. how to look at it and say, I'm providing a value to the world. I'm doing something that is beneficial. It makes me feel good. It makes other people feel good. I'm trying very hard to let them know that hard work is a wonderful thing. And I think that there's too much of like, I'm done with work. It's like, yay, I get to work now. And then it's, yay, I get to play with my kids. So honestly, I'm very, very fortunate in a lot of ways. So, but my kids are the most fortunate part of me. So for business and personal, I think the most important thing is be careful in your relationships. So when you're forming a relationship, there are a lot of deal killers. And I think that people personally in business tend to ignore those because they're so eager to enter into a relationship. But I think that the most important thing to remember is that for a relationship to be good and to last, you have to have a lot of commonalities, and you have to realize that most relationships aren't going to work. So view investors and co-founders the same way that you view potential personal partners, which is someone that, like, be wary at first, be more reluctant to enter into a relationship than eager to rush into it. Even if you feel like I have $0 left, I need to get this investor. Getting a bad investor is like getting a bad partner. And it's really hard to extricate yourself. It makes you feel terrible. You may lose your business. There are so many bad things that happen that, like, I have a list of 5 qualities that, are deal breakers in relationships. And I have a similar list of 5 qualities that are deal breakers in professional relationships. And it doesn't even matter where you fall on any of these issues. Like religion, for example, is one in personal relationships. It doesn't matter what religion you are. It just matters that you're both interested in the same level of interest in religion, that you both have the same level of intensity and importance in it. That is by far more a marker of happiness than sharing the same religion, but with 2 unequal values, one who doesn't believe in it and one who does, right? So these are things, it doesn't matter where you fall. It just matters that you match the other person. So that would be like my overall advice, generally speaking, is investors and co-founders are like sexless marriages, right? All the fighting, but none of the makeup sex. I hope if you are sleeping with your founders or your investors, unless you are, that one of them is your spouse, you have a problem. Please don't do that. It never ends well. It never ends well. It never ends well. And then the other business advice is remember that lawyers are not your business advisors typically. So do not ask your lawyer for business advice, and don't generally accept your lawyer as a business advisor, because they don't understand the entire breadth of a business decision. A business decision includes some legal aspect, but not an entire legal aspect. So unless that person has actually built a business successfully, their information is going to be limited entirely to what they hear second and third hand, or what they imagine to be true. On the other hand, do go to a lawyer, do go to any of your service providers when you're entering their arena, not just when you have a problem, but when you're doing something that, especially in a regulated area, tax, immigration, securities, any of these fields that have an agency attached particularly, you want to go to them preemptively because you can back into liability. So you can do almost anything you want to do legally. You can do almost anything as long as, it's a legal purpose. As long as you are not, as long as you're flexible in the amount of time it will take and the form it takes. So it may not look like what you originally planned, but it'll get you the same outcome. So always know where you're going before you go to one of your service providers, because that's what they really need. Is not, if you tell them I want to draft this agreement or whatever, you may not need that agreement. You need to know, like, what I want is to bring these 4 people into a joint venture with me, and they will help you come up with the form. That's what providers do, is help you with form. you're the one that comes up with the ultimate solution. And working together, you save a lot of money, you save a lot of risk, but make sure that in the end, the ultimate decision is actually yours. I know particularly women seem to be more susceptible to having, vociferous male providers telling them, you have to do this, you have to do that, and typically they don't know nearly as much as you do. They can't make an informed decision. I think the fetishization of the CEO culture is ridiculous. It's so harmful. Most people are not set up and not designed to be entrepreneurs. They are not, they don't have the personality, the drive, the love of chaos that people who are designed to be entrepreneurs have. You can't actually make those things. You either like boredom or you like chaos. You're really, people go one or the other, right? You're okay with one and not the other. There are a lot of different aspects, I think, that, suit an entrepreneur that don't suit other people. But I think that this idea that you're better or happier or something if you are an entrepreneur is false. Like, you should most people are not designed to be entrepreneurs, but most people are not designed to be ballerinas or engineers or astronauts. Like, most people are not designed to be everything. You're just find what works for you. And if it is working as an employee instead of being a CEO or a CFO or something like that, that is great. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Don't let anybody tell you that being a CEO is the most wonderful thing, because all the books out there are like, like delivering happiness. I had a worm farm when I was 7 and ta-da, now I'm rich. Like, they don't tell you that it's years of scary emotional roller coaster, that you have to give game face to everybody because you can't risk anybody thinking that you're not going to be successful, that you're constantly selling. The stress is incredible. You're working constantly. You're never not working. So there are wonderful, like, I love it, but I am that kind of crazy. So there are a lot of people who are not that kind of crazy, who are brilliant, who are amazing people, who have great ideas, but that doesn't mean that they should run off and be a CEO because that's what proves them to be smart or successful or whatever. It's just one particular shade of crazy. So if you're involved in the blockchain space, please contact me because I need to build up a good knowledge of what people are doing right now. I think I have a fair knowledge, but I can always use more, especially if you're not in a U.S. jurisdiction or you know somebody who's not in a U.S. jurisdiction. I'd like to get as much knowledge as possible. And if you're doing something new or interesting, let me know.